The first California County Pension Reform Conference was held Saturday, May 10th, 2014 in San Rafael. This is the second topic of the afternoon, a brief description of the 21 counties with independent county pension funds in California by John Dickerson, publisher of YourPublicMoney.com, and Bill Monet from Marin's CSPP. Most counties in California participate in CalPERS, but 21 have their own independent county pension funds, 6 of which are in the Bay Area. 4 of those have active citizen reform organizations, and Michael mentioned those at the beginning here. One thing I want to say is this is hugely complex stuff. We could literally talk for days about it and not even get to the bottom of so many of these things. By necessity, to talk about it in a few hours, we just have to barely skim the surface. There are hosts of ifs, ands, and buts around everything we're going to talk about. Those are the 21 counties that have county pension funds. In California, in 2012, the most recent information from the State Controller's Office, it was about $760 billion of total pension obligation in state and local governments in the state. 3/4 of that obligation is managed by the big statewide systems, CalPERS, CalSTRS, and so forth. 25% is owned by the local systems, those 21 counties, and also a number of charter cities, of which 2/3 of that is in the county. That means 1/6 of California's total pension obligation is vested in those 21 county systems. That's a pretty significant number. There's a huge range in the size of these systems. 3 Southern California counties, LA and Orange and San Diego, hold half of it. My little Podunky Mendocino is the absolutely smallest slice of it all. We in the Bay Area, Contra Costa and Alameda are here, so we have a couple of mid-sized systems, and then the rest of us, Sonoma, San Mateo, Marin, and Mendocino, are small. So we in the Bay Area don't have the big systems that people in other places have got. Now, the way it is supposed to work, the way I believe that every pension funding plan adopted by county retirement boards is supposed to work, is that something called the normal contribution plus investment profits based on that contribution is going to fully fund the pensions. And the normal contribution is something that an actuary calculates to say, well, if you put this much money in the pension fund this year, then all the pensions that are being earned this year will be paid in the future. And so the way it's supposed to work and the way it should work is that's all the money that should have to be contributed. And I think from the people's point of view, okay, it's a fair deal. We've made this deal with you as the employees. You worked for us loyally through this period of time, at the end of which this will be your pension. But I don't think, from the public's point of view, that there's an unstated codicil to that agreement that says, and every year, year after year, we're going to be deeper and deeper in debt. I think that's not part of the moral deal that's been made. So who funds pensions? In terms of the normal contribution, it's split between employees and the county in some proportion, not 50-50 usually, but some proportion. Retirees are retired. By the time they retire, their pension is supposed to be fully funded. That's a fundamental principle of how they design the funding plans for the pensions. Well, the way it needs to work is that in the real world, you're going to earn more some years. In the real world, you're going to earn less some years. And so the way it's going to work is if you have a properly functioning pension system that's achieving its goals to fully fund pensions with only that normal contribution, then sometimes you're going to have less money than you need, sometimes more. But over the long run, you should be fully funded. It's really a myth out there in a lot of the public pension world that 80% is a good funding level. If you're 80% funded, you're creating debt every year. It's the math, there's no other way around it. 80% may be all right at the bottom of a market, but you should be 120% at the top of a market. you're going around, up and down, what your target has to be. But if it starts to look like this, that's a failing pension system from the public's point of view, because that's imposing more and more and more debt. Those are supposed to be paid every year. When a county employee goes home at night, they'll never get those hours back. They're done. Clock only runs in one direction. Everything they earned should have been funded that day. But what has happened to a whole lot, and you know, I wish employees would kind of understand this, the funding of a very significant part of their benefit wasn't paid. And it's putting them at risk. So there's two ways that somebody has to pay it back, and there's two ways to pay that back. One is that you have a net pension liability. Sometimes it's called an unfunded pension liability or actuarial. There's all kinds of fancy words that are hard to understand. And the county, you can make payments on that, and some people say, well, that's just like a mortgage. Well, the problem is, yeah, you may make payments over 30 years like a mortgage, but when you're buying a house, when you're paying a mortgage, you're buying a house and you're living in it year after year. It's a long-lived asset. It's sort of like you're paying rent to live in the house. But when you're paying for services that were provided 20 years before, you're not paying for current services anymore. You're not paying for something that's providing value to you. So the second thing they can do is borrow money by selling pension obligation bonds. And when you do that, the pension fund gets the money, but the county keeps the debt. And since the county keeps the debt, we the people have the debt. Pension obligation bonds are unfunded pension debt, and you cannot figure out the impact on the people of unfunded pensions if you don't include the pension bonds. If a big debt develops and those normal contributions were paid, like the actuary said, then you can't avoid the conclusion, the mathematical conclusions that, well, that means the normal contribution was too low. As things turned out, not enough was paid in. There's no other mathematical conclusion. It's unavoidable. So who's going to pay it? Well, we know in the normal yearly contribution, the employee and the county both pay a share of that in some proportion. But if an unfunded obligation, the general rule, there's some exceptions, but almost always only the county has to pay it. Now there's a conclusion here, which is we now know that that was too small. But now we have to pay the result of that having been too low, but only one party has to pay it. So the unavoidable consequence is a significant amount of that obligation to pay their future pensions has been transferred on to the public with interest-bearing debt. And that's a mathematical statement. There's no other conclusion. That's how the numbers work. This is, here's the 21 county systems, and were they overfunded or underfunded over the last 20 years? This is the last from 2012 to 83, I think, or 90, whatever that is. That's 20 years. Okay, so we had some pretty good years, and we got a whole bunch, most of them were funded. I've been trying to figure out, is that Mount Tam or Mount Diablo? It's one of those two. I think, as it turns out, it's more Mount Diablo. But then everything fell back down again. And so now all 21 counties are underfunded. Well, this is a little kind of a scary graph. Looks like a bunch of sharks. This is what's happened to the stock market since World War II. These green shark things sticking up, those are the bull markets. That's when the market increased. And how high that goes is how much the market gained in that bull market. On the other side of it, how much did the market go down in all the recessions that have happened? What sticks out? What's the most unusual thing in that graph? It's the longest bull market in American history in the 1990s. The stock market grew the longest in history. Okay, so there you are in 2000 at the peak. Now I'm going to go back to here. There's the peak. That happened at the longest bull market expansion of the stock market in American history. The mayor was talking about SB 400 when they gave retroactive benefits. It was to the highway patrol, as I understand it, increased the benefits and gave them retroactive to the day they were hired. Well, that started a domino series. That started a cascade all over the state of California, where all the other state agencies we needed to start doing the same for them, and then the counties, and then the cities. And so it got to our counties here. Well, an interesting thing, right in this period of time, one, we're now in the dot-com collapse. We're now in a recession. We're not at the top of the market. We're going down. The other thing is, in Mendocino County and Sonoma County, right at that very same time, in our county, they sold about $100 million of pension obligation bonds. And how much was sold in Sonoma during that period? 210. So our two counties had sold $300 million of pension obligation bonds because the pension funds were underfunded. Immediately, our two counties increased pension benefits for every employee, about a third of which were retroactive back to the day they were hired. And the argument that was made in favor of that is, hey, your pension fund's in great shape. It's almost fully funded. You're just going to be really unfair if you don't provide these pension increases to these folks when your pension fund is in such good shape. No mention of the $300 million of debt we just took on. And that's a question that those who say there's no problem with the way the systems work, how can you justify that? I don't think you can. So, last little bit for me. The Government Accounting Standards Board adopted new standards, finally, that is a huge change in the way governments are going to have to report their pension finances. And this is just going to be one example of the impact. All our counties' pension funds are going to have to use these new rules for their financial years ending this year. Mendocino County at the end of June. Next year, for June 2015, every county in the state of California is going to have to use these new rules. And I'm going to show you what it would have done in these 7 counties for their 2000 statements. These are the 6 in the Bay Area and Orange County, because Jack wanted to know how bad it was back at home. So this shows for these 7 counties what percentage of their assets were claimed by pension bonds, all other debt, and how much was the net worth of the county. You guys, Marin County, having the highest per capita income of any of America's 3,300 counties, 80% of your assets you owned. Us, not having the highest per capita income, and Contra Costa, we only own a third of ours free and clear. Okay, and those 7 counties reported a total of $10 billion of net worth. If these new rules that are going to be implemented next year had existed then, this is what it would have looked like. Those are unfunded pensions. You can't see the boxes very well. They're still in there. They don't show up on this one very much. Here's the other debt. Contra Costa County and Mendocino County would have reported $160 of debt for every $100 of assets. Orange County would have basically been totally wiped out. They would have had no net worth at all. You guys, you know, what I say about you guys is you guys get to be John Jacob Astor in Titanic. You know, you're the richest guys in a sinking ship. But they reported $10 billion of net worth. If these had been in place, these rules, it would have been $1 billion. $9 billion of public equity would have been shown to have been wiped out. And the reason is because the governments have never reported unfunded pensions as a debt. And but the people we owe the money to expect us to pay it. That sounds like a debt. And they have a legal right to it. It's a debt. So that debt is going to go on our balance sheet, and $9 billion of net assets disappeared in 7 counties. There's 3,300 counties. There's thousands, tens of thousands of cities and school districts and special districts. There isn't enough red ink in North America to produce what's going to happen in 1 year from now. When that happens, we're going to see just how bad this situation really is. So that's my little wrap. My colleague, Bill Monet, is going to describe an excellent report that Bill and several of his colleagues just came up with, and I'm going to go operate the slides. And then we'll take some questions.
I'm going to pick up where John left off. This week we published a report through the California Policy Center. It was a joint effort, and I think there are 3 messages from this. One is the power and effectiveness of reformers like myself working with other people from other counties. The other message, more serious message, really is that the position of our counties, the 12 Searle counties or 37 Act counties with independent pension funds, is a lot worse than we commonly believe. And the third message is that we really are in a position where most of us, we can't really afford the liabilities we've already incurred. First, let me get to the first point about shared resources. This was an idea that Ken Churchill, my friend from Sonoma, had. He was looking at a report that came out of our group in Marin County, and he liked a concept very much which my colleague Marty Miller devised, which is let's not look just at pension obligations. Let's look at all of our retiree debt, all of our retiree obligations, which would include pension unfunded liabilities and the pension obligation bonds, as well as unfunded pension retiree medical liabilities. Let's put all 3 together. So Ken started this effort. His particular passion is the 20 Searle counties or 20 counties with independent pension funds. He pitched the idea to Ed Ring at the California Policy Center. Ed loved it, said, we'll publish it. And then said we needed someone who's really good at drudge work, someone who's willing to read 40 different financial reports. And Ken said, I know Bill Monet. So that was my role in this. But it was very much a joint effort and the effort of people from different counties. So could we? Yeah, 3 pages, 2 graphs. So just go, that's it. So this is, I've summarized this brief report into 2 graphs. What this shows is the funding level for retiree liabilities, which again includes pension unfunded liabilities plus pension obligation bonds plus retiree medical obligations. And I've put a blue bar over this at the 80% funding level. The horizontal axis is funding percent going from 0 to 120, and along the vertical axis you have the 20 different counties that comprise the Searle system. And the ones in red are the 6 Bay Area counties that we're particularly interested in. John mentioned the fact that a well-funded plan or plans should oscillate between about 80% funding in bad years and 120% funding in good years. Now, we've had 5 very good years. The S&P 500 is up about 2.5%, maybe 300% since its trough in March of 2009. So we should be in a very good position right now. We should be at the 120% point at the extreme right-hand side of that graph. As you can see, nobody's even close, and in fact, only 1 county is greater than 80% funded. That's Tulare County. None of our 6 counties are even close. Here in Marin, I think we're at 61%. Sonoma's at 60%. It's not good news. We in Marin, and I'm from Marin, we like to think that we are different. We certainly are wealthier, but in terms of funding, we are not different. We're sort of middle of the pack. Frankly, we're sort of in the bottom third of the pack. And that's really the message here. It's an election year. We hear a lot of statements about how well funded they are, but a lot of the funding in the pension plans is debt. Most of the retiree medical plans are not funded at all. It's really shocking. In fact, most of these 20 counties are not even making the annual required contributions that's necessary to fund these over 30 years. So Marin is not different, and collectively we are not in good shape. So next one, please. What this shows is Some people argue that, well, the 80% benchmark is not really interesting. What really matters is, can you afford the payments? I've heard this, for example, from John Bartel. Don't want to pick on John, but he does a lot of work. He's a consulting actuary that works for a lot of counties and cities in our areas, and that's one of John's arguments. So let's test that. Can we afford it? And our test of can we afford it is this. We said if we take this debt, this retiree debt, and we fund it over 20 years at a interest rate of 7.5%, the interest rate that's preferred by most of our pension plans, what would it cost us in terms of all of our governmental revenues? And I don't just mean general fund revenues. I mean all governmental funds. So it is the broadest and most generous possible view of our government's revenues. And this is the answer. Nobody is, well, you can see that most of these in the red bar are about 15%. For Contra Costa, for the next 20 years, if you take 22% of your governmental revenues and devote it to paying off existing debt, not normal costs for new liabilities, but existing debt that exists today, you could pay it off in 20 years if and only if that you devoted 22% of your annual governmental revenues for that purpose, which would be a crushing burden. You couldn't do it. In Marin, it's 16%. So even in Marin, we are different in that we're wealthier, we're not so well funded. It would still take a heck of a lot of money to pay off that debt. Here in Marin, we are fortunate. We have a very thoughtful and knowledgeable county administrator. He understands this. He's made it clear to the people and to the county supervisors that every spare dollar we get in this county has to go to paying off debt. We are paying our annual required contribution for our retiree medical, and we're putting in more whenever we can. At a recent budget hearing, Steve Kinsey, one of our supervisors, remarked, there is no more money. If we want to do anything new, it's going to require new revenue. That's where we are here in Marin. We can probably support the activities we're doing now. We can support nothing else. That's why, for example, that we need a new emergency radio system. There's no money for that. So that's going to be on the ballot in form of a new tax in the fall. We need more money for the library. That's probably going to be on the ballot for as a tax in the fall. There's talk about children's services. I'm not quite sure what that includes, but there's no money for that either. And there's talk about a third tax being added. So this is what Kinsey meant. You know, we can pay for our debts over 20 years, but there's no money for anything else. So that's where we are. If you want to read the report at the California Policy Center, it's online, easy to find. It's a brief report. I recommend it. Thank you.
System together quite yet. So does anybody have any questions for us? Good. Yes, sir. Tom.
In Sonoma County, thank you, Ted Churchill and Mr. Monette, for your work. But what we have to acknowledge also in Sonoma County, we've got a $500 million unfunded liability with the retirement fund. We also have $500 million of pension obligation bonds, and we have $300 million of unfunded liability with the retiree medical. But that's not the big picture. The big picture is every dollar of unfunded liability paid back over 20 years, it costs you $2. So for the next 20 years paying this back, as these gentlemen have so well explained, it's huge, and it is bankrupting our counties and taking all these services. And I just want to thank them for this report because they did a great job with it.
Yes, sir.
Are these pension obligation bonds that were put up for voter approval?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, and I've looked into this a lot, I don't believe there's ever been a pension bond at the local level. Well, period. No, they've never been put up for vote. Now, that has never been legally challenged, to the best of my knowledge, at the local level. Dozens and dozens of pension bonds have been sold. However, this gentleman right there challenged the state of California when they tried to sell pension bonds, and the court declared you have to take it to a vote of the people. So nobody has ever challenged a local, and there are folks looking for it, but no, it's the courts have never challenged it, and none of them have ever been. When he won the case and the state was told they had to take it to a vote of the people, they decided not to do that. Well, he's going to come up here next, so I'm setting him up. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, let me explain that little trick. Okay, so the current standards, as I said, are that unfunded pensions aren't listed as a debt. Okay, well, if they're not listed as a debt, what they want to sell these bonds to pay down this debt, but it's not a legal debt. It's not reported. And so what they do, and this is what happened, I'll describe what they did in Mendocino because this is what all the local governments have done. In December of 2002, they sued all the citizens of Mendocino County. And there was a notice that showed up in the paper, and it said, you are being sued. You may lose your house, you may lose, because of the unfunded obligations and stuff. And nobody could read that and understand what it was. But what it was asking the Superior Court that even though it wasn't listed as a debt, even though the county officials, whenever they were asked, said, oh, it's not a real debt, they were asking the court to suddenly declare that it's a real debt. Because once the court says, well, yeah, that's a real debt, then they could run out and they could sell the bonds. And they would all do that within the same fiscal year, so that by the time that the next reports came around, all of a sudden this bonds debt showed up, but they never had to report the unfunded pensions as a debt that drove it. So and there's a company, Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe, high-powered, very fancy, smart finance people, and they have a brochure about pension obligation bonds, and they actually kind of brag in there that they figured out how to do this in order to bypass the California constitutional requirement that debt like that be submitted to a vote of the people. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I'm wondering if we have all this, obviously it's a disaster in the making. I understand that it's an incredible burden to fund all the stuff that's happened, not to mention the stuff going forward. Is there a likely path? Is there precedent? Is it possible to say how this will work out? Because it seems that in the main, not enough is being done in a timely enough fashion to stop it. So it just looks like a slow-moving train wreck. I'm just wondering what you think the likely path might be.
I myself think that when the next time the market goes down, and it will, there will be another recession, I think that's when we're all going to get to deal with it. And my own view is it will become obvious that in history, when a debt's too big to get paid, it doesn't get paid. And it's a terrible thing. But the folks that are saying there's no problem are directing us over the cliff. And I'll just be very blunt about it. And when we get to that point, and it's like the folks in Detroit, I mean, there's 80-year-old retirees in Detroit that are getting their pensions cut. And we really want to continue to go down that same path? That's a good thing? That's social justice? I don't think so.